What's up guys, my name's Brandon and Apple just released iOS 18.4 and it contains more than 60 new features and changes. So in this video, we're going to discuss everything new in this update, including those new features, the performance, the battery life, and if you should update or not. Okay, so let's start by talking about what's new in iOS 18.4. And throughout this video, I'm gonna have iOS 18.3 on the left, iOS 18.4 on the right, so you can see the differences side by side. So the first new feature in iOS 18.4 that we're going to talk about is inside of the control center. So if you swipe down to go to your control center and you tap and hold and go to add a control and you swipe down, you'll see that we have a brand new section called ambient music. And what this does is it allows you to add these toggles that play music based on the mood. So we have sleep, chill, productivity, and well-being. Also in the control center, you'll notice these two little arrows to the right of the focus mode. So that basically just indicates that there's more in that menu. Before there was just nothing there. There's also a slight change to the glyph icons for volume and brightness. So if you lower the volume or the brightness, you will see that the glyph icon turns from blue to white. And for brightness, it turns from yellow to white once you get close to the bottom. Before, it just stayed that same color. It stayed that yellow or that blue color the whole time. And if you look really closely, you'll notice another change here related to the cellular connectivity. So we have two bars right now, and that's now indicated in the control center connectivity platter right there. You can see the little green icon. If we go ahead and haptic press on that, you can see that it updates in real time based on what our actual connection is. And the same goes for Wi-Fi. So if my Wi-Fi were to drop down to 2 bars, it would indicate that inside of the connectivity platter. And while we're in the control center, if you have an Apple Intelligence device, we have a brand new Apple Intelligence in Siri section where we have Talk to Siri, Type to Siri, and also Visual Intelligence. And we'll talk about that Visual Intelligence in a moment, but you are able to access that right here from the control center if you have a compatible device. But easily my favorite feature in the control center with iOS 18.4 is a very small quality of life change, but it is something that makes a big impact on me all the time. So if you search for something in the control center, if you go to add a toggle and you search for like connectivity, for example, let's say I wanted to add AirDrop, but now when I go to add a control, I have to, usually before I would have to retype in whatever I wanted to, access and then go back to the section and keep adding. But now it remembers where you left off. So it remembers that I was searching for something and it pulls that back up and takes me back to the section I was in. Now in 18.3, if I did that same thing and I added something and I went back to add control, you can see it starts me over and then I have to retype it in, and every single time I have to keep going there. But now in 18.4, again, it remembers where you left off, which is again, just a great quality of life change to the control center. This update also includes 7 new emoji. So you can see we have the smiley with the bags under the eyes right there. I like that one a lot. And you can see we have the fingerprint, we have the different ones, the splatter, all those right there, the shovel. Those are all new with iOS 18.4. iOS 18.4 also brings Apple Intelligence to the EU. So if you have an iPhone 16 series or an iPhone 15 Pro or Pro Max and you live in the EU, you now have access to Apple Intelligence. And Apple Intelligence is also now available in other regions and languages as well, as you can see on the screen right now. And the new Apple Intelligence feature in iOS 18.4 is called Priority Notifications. So now if you get a notification and it's deemed as an important notification, your device will signify that it's a priority notification and it will separate it from your other notifications so you do not miss it. And you can see we have a little animation there and it's really cool how it kind of goes back to being priority even after you swipe up to see your other notifications. And you could also disable this for certain applications as well. So if you go into your settings and go to notifications, we have this brand new section here under Apple Intelligence that says prioritize notifications. And if you go into there, you can see we get a little animation for how this works. You can turn it off completely if you do not like it. And then you also have applications that you can turn off prioritize notifications from. So if there's certain apps that you know are never going to be a priority, you can go into here and disable those. There's also a new animation for Type to Siri. So again, I have iOS 18.3 on the left, 18.4 on the right. If we double tap to bring up the Type to Siri and we start typing something. So pay attention to the arrow on the right hand side. When I go to it, you can see it does a little spin right there before it gives you the response. So a minor change, but it is something new. Now also, like I briefly mentioned earlier, in iOS 18.3, 18.3, we just had this Siri section for our control center toggles, but now it's combined with Apple Intelligence to make Apple Intelligence and Siri its own little section here, along with a new glyph icon. And we no longer have just Type to Siri, we also have Talk to Siri, and most importantly, Visual Intelligence. So you can now access Visual Intelligence from the control center. So before, you were only able to access that through the camera control button on the iPhone 16 series, but now we have a Visual Intelligence toggle right there in the control center, and if you tap on that, it will launch the Visual Intelligence interface. But the best part about this is that this is now available for the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max. So if you have a 15 Pro or Pro Max, you now have access to Visual Intelligence, which was previously an iPhone 16 exclusive. You just have to access this through the control center or through the action button, because that's also in the action button now. So if you go into your settings and go to action button, you can see that we have a brand new toggle here for Visual Intelligence. So now if you press and hold on the action button, you can access Visual Intelligence with a nice little animation that comes out of the dynamic island up there. And you can also add Visual Intelligence to the lock screen. So if you swipe down, you can see that we not only have the ambient music toggles like we saw earlier, but also Visual Intelligence and the other Apple Intelligence toggles there as well. You can add those to the lock screen. If we head into the Image Playground application and we go to add a new image, if you tap on the plus down here in the bottom right, you can see that we have a brand new style. So we now have the sketch style for the Image Playground application. So let me show you how that looks. So here's a picture of me with sunglasses, and you can see how that looks with the sketch feature. So pretty cool, pretty different from the other two styles of illustration and animation. And if you go into your settings and go to notifications, you'll notice that we have the new Apple Intelligence section in our settings. So before, we did have summarized notifications. It was up here combined with these other ones, but now with 18.4, we have a new Apple Intelligence section that combines the prioritize notifications and summarize notifications in one. And below that, it also says that these are beta features, may contain errors. Now, this one might be hard to depict on camera, but if you take a look at the privacy indication dot up in our dynamic island up top, you'll notice that it is much brighter in iOS 18.4. So all of the dots, whether they're green, orange, whatever color, they are now much brighter. Like, it's noticeably brighter in person than it was on previous versions of iOS 18. And there's a look at the orange privacy indication dot. Now, if we go out of here, take a look at what happens. The dot now moves to the right of the island right there. So it's also very bright over there. And it's also interesting because if you tap and hold on the dynamic island, you'll see that the orange dot kind of moves over all the way to the top right of the screen, but it maintains that smooth animation. It kind of moves out with it, as you can see right there. It's not clunky. So that is intentional, and that's pretty cool. And you can see on 18.3, there was no animation. It just stayed over there way to the right of the screen. It looked kind of out of place, but now it's, much better and much more fluid with the OS. Let's head into the Photos application because we have some nice changes here in iOS 18.4. So starting off with some filters. So if you go down here to the bottom left and you go into your filters section, you'll see that we have a new option for not in an album. And also, if you've had photos that have been synced from a Mac or a PC, there's also a filter for those. And if we scroll down and head into the media types section, you will notice a difference right away here. We now have an edit button up in the top right corner. And if we tap on that edit button, this allows us to reorder this section. So for media types, if you don't care about live photos, for example, but you really care about videos, you can move those all the way to the top. That way your videos always show up at the top of media types. And you can see this is a little bit clunky right here, but it is new. You can see there. So now when we go back, now videos shows up at the top of media types. And the same thing goes with utilities. So if we go into the utilities, you'll see that we have the edit button up in the top right hand corner, and we can do the same thing there. We can reorder, and we could also reset the order up in the top left. Now we also have a change to our collections. So if we go into one of our collections right here, we'll just go into recently saved. For example, you can see that up in the top right, we have a change. So before we just had, signifying that we're in a shared library right now, but now we have a 3-dot menu up there regardless of, what library we're in, and we can search and share. Also, if we go to the filters in the bottom left, you can see that we can now sort our photos inside of a collection by saved first or saved last. Or if it's not recently saved, it will just say sort by oldest first or newest first. So that's now a possibility inside of collections. Now, there's also been a nice change to the albums view. So if you go into your albums view right here where you can see all of your albums, and you go to the 3-dot menu up in the top right, so you can see a pretty big difference here right away. So we had the option before to change between grid and list view, but it was down here at the bottom. Now up top, it's changed between list view and key photo. So it's changed from grid to key photo. They do the same thing, but now it's named different. And there's also a glyph icon to correspond with it. And it's also now at the top instead of being down here at the bottom. And you can see that you could also now sort by date modified. Before, you could only sort by custom order or by name. And on top of that, we also have a filter option. So you can now filter by albums or folder. So if you have a folder with multiple albums, you can now sort and filter those. And you can see the nice little glyph icon that shows up there in the top right. And you also have an option down here, a new option to remove filter. So if you tap that, it removes it. And if you go into the actual album, you can see a change here as well. So the key photo is no longer massive and just taking up like half the screen. Now you see more of the actual photos instead of that key photo, which is a nice little change. And also if you tap on the 3 dots up in the top right-hand corner, you can see that up top, we now have the edit title and photos option moved to the top. So before that was all the way down here and it was a little pencil glyph. Now it's all the way at the top with the key photo to the left of it, and it shows the amount of items, and we have a new glyph there that indicates, to be able to change the name of the album. And then below that, we have search, share, and add photos. And you might have noticed there's a name change there as well. Before it was share photos, now it's just share. And if we head into our settings for photos, we have a couple of changes here. So we have a new toggle for show recently viewed and shared. So in our utilities folder, you can see that we do not have either of those, but if I turn this on, you can see that we now have our recently viewed, and this shows us the photos that we recently viewed. And of course, it will also show shared photos as well, as long as you have that turned on, but you can turn that off. And there's also a change to hidden photos, kind of a bug fix really. So Apple says that hidden photos are no longer included for import to Mac or a PC if the use Face ID option is enabled in Photos settings. So if you go into your photos right here and you have the use Face ID turned on, that way it protects your hidden and recently deleted albums. As long as that's turned on, people will no longer be able to, or you will no longer be able to import those photos to your Mac or PC. iOS 18.4 also adds some changes to Safari. So now if you go into Safari and you go to a new tab and you go to the search bar down here, it will now show your recent searches that you made in Safari. So you can quickly go back into searching for those things. However, you can clear all of these right here, and you could also turn this feature off completely if you don't want all of your recent searches showing up every time you go into a new tab and you go to search right here or enter a website name. So if you head into your Safari settings, you will see that we have this new toggle here called show recent searches. And if you turn that off, you would no longer see your recent searches right here. So if you X out of this and we go ahead to this tab and go in here again, you can see that they no longer appear. Also, the default video player has new animations. When you go to fast forward or rewind, you can see we have that little jump right there. And this is also inside of the Apple TV application, but you can see that new animation for those. I also noticed that we no longer have the little lock icon to the left of the website address that usually indicates HTTPS, but I guess everything is pretty much HTTPS these days, so it does not signify that. But if you go to the little 3-dot menu right here, and then we go to the 3 dots right here, we do have something new in this section in the page menu called Connection Security Details. And if you tap on that, that just shows you the connection is secure, and it shows you the certificate right here, and it ensures that that HTTPS certificate is valid, and it shows you when it's valid until. You can even see details and learn more right there as well. In the Apple Passwords application, if you go into the codes section for your 2-factor authentication codes, we now have a timer countdown up in the top right corner to indicate when that 6-digit code is going to change. And if you go into that website's details, you can see the verification code right there with the timer to the left of it in that section as well. We also have new home screen widgets for podcasts. So we have the Up Next section right here. We also have library, and we have shows. So 3 different types right here. So if you want a specific show on your homepage, you can do that. You also have Up Next, and I have saved episodes right here. Here's what this size of those widgets looks like on my home screen. If we head back into our settings and go down to the bottom to apps and then to default apps at the top, we have a brand new section here for translation. So now you can select a default translation app with iOS 18.4. And if you live in the EU, there's also now an option to choose a different navigation app. So if you want to select Waze, for example, example, as a default instead of maps. You can now do that if you're in the EU. In the messages application, if you go to the emoji picker, you can see that the Genmoji icon to the right of the search field now says Genmoji. It's not just a little icon with a plus. We now have it typed out, so it's easier to access and understand that it's there. Oh, and also Genmoji now works properly in WhatsApp and in Facebook Messenger. iOS 18.4 also brings RCS messaging support to more carriers. So carriers like Mint Mobile, Google Fi, Ultra Mobile, Tello, US Mobile, and soon it will be coming to T-Mobile MVNOs. So 18.4 will finally bring RCS to the carriers that were left out earlier. I might be crazy, but I use the Australian variation for my Siri voice, and we now have 2 new voices in iOS 18.4. So we now have 4 total instead of 2 like we had on 18.3. This update also brings lossless audio and ultra low latency audio to the AirPods Max with USB-C. And Apple also now sells a USB-C to 3.5mm audio cable because of this. If we head into the Apple News application and go to following, we have a brand new section here called Apple News Plus Food. So this is a pretty awesome section. So this gives you a lot of different recipes from some of the world's best recipe publishers. So if you go into here, you can see it's really nicely laid out. So it shows, like, if you wanted to do something in less than 30 minutes, I can do that. And it will, basically filter out the ones that take longer than 30 minutes. So if I want to make this right here, for example, I tap on it, take a look at the interface. It's very similar to what we saw with the, new invites application. We have cook, save, share. We have the ingredients that we need right here, along with the directions. It directly interfaces with the timer, so you can select that to set a timer. And what's really cool is if you start cooking, take a look at this. It gives you the directions in like an Apple Music lyrics type UI. It's really awesome. You can switch back and forth between the ingredients and the directions. You can see it's very fluid, very solid. I mean, just typical Apple, but it's really cool. It has no business being this cool for recipes and following along with the recipe, but it's pretty awesome. There's also a story that goes along with it. If you want to read more about that specific recipe, you can see that right there, which is really cool. You have the more to explore section down here, more like this. It's just a pretty awesome section. You can also filter this as well. You can really filter it quite a bit for exactly what you want to cook. So this is very handy, especially when you can just save these and go back to them later. It's just very handy to have, so you don't need a third-party application, especially if you already pay for Apple News Plus. In the Shortcuts application, we have new actions for changing application settings. So you can see we can change books, calendar, freeform, news, reminders, Safari, voice memos, and weather settings via a shortcut action. So if I go to Safari, for example, you can see I added one for weather as well. You can turn and you can change all of these right here. So you have the option to choose between these different settings, and you can have, different actions for these settings for these specific applications. And also for messages, we now have an action for opening a specific conversation. Now heading back into our settings, if we go into the camera section and then into camera control, we have a change right here. If you scroll down, so before you just had to choose which application you wanted to open up right here from this main screen when you launch the camera control. But now it's a little bit more streamlined. So you can see that under launch camera, this whole section right here is new. So it's a menu you can go into instead of just being switching between single click or double click. So now when you go into there, it now shows you exactly what you saw on the front page before. So if we select Instagram, for example, and then go back, now under launch camera, it says Instagram instead of, camera. And if I change that to magnifier, it will say magnifier right there under launch camera. And we have 2 other changes down here as well. So we have require screen on. So if this is turned on, that means that the camera control will only work when your screen is unlocked. If your phone is locked, it will not, register if you press and hold on the camera control, which can be nice in some scenarios. And then also launch visual intelligence is new. So if you want to disable visual intelligence from the camera control button itself, you can disable that. That way you can, maybe access that through the action button or through the control center toggle like we showed earlier. That's just another option there. In the wallet application, we have a new 3-dot menu in the top right. And if you tap on that, it will show you your orders, pre-authorized payments, and settings. And if you go into pre-authorized payments, that just shows you any, account or basically any website that has access to a pre-authorized payment for you, like on a monthly basis. In the App Store, we now have a change to applications when you start downloading them. So before, if you wanted to stop the download and pick it back up later, you couldn't do that. You just had to stop the download entirely, and you can see it just completely stops. But now in 18.4, you have a pause button instead of a stop button, and when you tap on that and you pause it, you get a new resume button that shows right there, which is nice, and then you can go ahead and resume that download. You'll also start noticing in iOS 18.4 that you see summaries for user reviews. After installing iOS 18.4 in the Mail application, if you go to your primary inbox, it will give you kind of a refresher on what the categories are, and you can turn that off right here if you don't like it, or you can just tap on OK to dismiss that new pop-up. In the Apple TV application, we now have a couple of changes. So before we had the plus icon up in the top right next to our profile image. Now it's a big plus in the middle, and we also have a big play button right here now for these previews. And also, like I mentioned earlier, we have the animation for when you go back or forward right here. You can see before, if you went back or forward, we did not have an animation. Now these little arrows spin. This update also adds support for Matter compatible robot vacuums, so you can now add those to your home application. You could also add them to scenes and automations. Now this update also gives you a new default application called Apple Vision Pro, and this is just simply a companion application for your Apple Vision Pro if you are one of the 15 people out there like me with one still. And this application is basically just going to show you getting started tips. It's going to show you new content as well. So if there's any new content that comes up, any new games, spatial gallery, all of those are going to be shown right here, which is nice because that way you don't have to actually put on the headset to see kind of what's new. Also, Apple Fitness Plus collections can now be added to the library. We also have a bug fix for screen time app limits. So before, if a child uninstalled and reinstalled an application, it would reset that app limit time, but now the app limit persists even after a child uninstalls and reinstalls an application. And Apple also mentions that the setup assistant now streamlines the steps and kind of just the process of setting up an account for a child. We also have support for 10 new system languages. So you can see all the languages right here on the screen. Those have all been added with iOS 18.4. Now here's a pretty cool change that I can see being useful. So with iOS 18.4 and macOS Sequoia 15.4, you can now set up a new Mac with your iPhone. So if you bring it close to your Mac, just like you can with two iPhones, you can now quickly and conveniently sign in to your Apple account to get your files, your photos, your messages, all of that moved over to the Mac simply without another Mac nearby. If you use CarPlay, you now have a third row of CarPlay icons on the home screen rather than just two rows. There's also a new API added for sports in CarPlay. And for iPadOS 18.4 and macOS 15.4, you guys now get the new Mail application that was only on iOS 18 before. Now, as far as the overall performance on iOS 18.4, I've actually had really good performance so far with this version, especially compared to 18.3 and 18.2. So I have noticed that it's a little bit more stable, a little bit more fluid, and also I just have less bugs overall, like system-wide on iOS 18.4, especially when it comes to the notification center and just other little random areas where I had minor bugs in the past. So 18.4, definitely solid in terms of performance, and you can see what I scored here in the Geekbench 6 benchmark. Now, as far as battery life goes on iOS 18.4, I've also had a really good experience with battery life on my iPhone 16 Pro Max. So I'm currently on 75%. You'll have to go back to the beginning of the video to see what I started with, but battery life has been great so far. For me, definitely a small improvement over 18.3 through 18.3.2. And of course, we will have some security patches in this update as well. However, at the time of recording, those have not been published by Apple, but once they are published, I will leave those down in the description below. So with all that being said, should you update to iOS 18.4? And I would say for most people, yes. Like if you want to access the new emoji, the new photos changes, the new Apple Intelligence features, all the bug fixes, the security patches, and of course the icing on top could even be better performance and better battery life like I've personally been getting on my 16 Pro Max. So, obviously if you don't like any of these changes, if you're not a fan of literally any of these changes, then maybe you don't want to update, but just for security alone, stability, performance, all those things, it's usually a good idea to go ahead and update. If you're worried about issues, maybe wait a few days, but I have been beta testing this for a while and really no major issues came about except for on one of the RC builds. But aside from that, really no downsides to upgrading to iOS 18.4 in my opinion. But of course, like I said, if you're having absolutely no issues on the version you're currently on, then by all means, just stay there until you feel like it's worth upgrading for you. And then I wanted to just finish off quickly by mentioning that we are going to see iOS 18.5 get released at some point, most likely in May, and then we will be seeing the first beta of iOS 19 in June, right here on Monday, June 9th. So those are a couple of things to look forward to if you are a subscriber of the channel. If you're not, I think now is a good time to go ahead and do so. Hit that subscribe button down below. I bring you guys these iOS update videos every time a new update drops. Anyways, that's it for iOS 18.4. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, as always, give it a thumbs up. Again, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future iOS update videos just like this one. But anyways, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.